What if every human on Earth suddenly spoke the exact same language? Imagine the world waking up, phones flashing the same phrase, street signs humming identical syllables. Picture this. Today, more than 7,000 distinct tongues echo across continents, each a living archive of history, identity, and thought. UNESCO reports that a language disappears roughly every 2 weeks, a silent loss of cultural DNA. Now, freeze that diversity in an instant. The moment the universal tongue ignites, borders blur, and the familiar chorus of accents fades into a single, seamless voice. Think of the ripple that starts in classrooms, where teachers no longer translate, where every student grasps the same lesson without a word lost in translation. What does that mean for the way we see ourselves? Identity, once woven from language, would be forced to find new threads. Traditions that hinge on specific phrases, poems, prayers, lullabies, would either morph or vanish. Artists would lose the subtle cadence that gives a folk song its soul, yet they would also gain an audience that instantly understands every nuance. But how would economies shift when the cost of translation disappears? Global trade already hinges on contracts written in English, Mandarin, Arabic. Now every negotiation could happen in real time. No middlemen, no misinterpretations. The World Bank notes that language barriers cost businesses up to $1.5 trillion annually. Imagine that sum erased overnight. Politically, diplomats would no longer need interpreters, and the subtle art of negotiating through carefully chosen words could become brutally direct. Power dynamics could realign. Countries that previously leveraged linguistic expertise might lose that edge, while smaller nations could finally have an equal voice on the world stage. Science, too, would accelerate. A shared language means research papers, datasets, and classroom lectures become instantly accessible. The International Council for Science estimates that collaborative breakthroughs increase by 30% when teams share a common tongue. This boost would become the new baseline. So what if, instead of a monolingual world, we celebrated the mosaic of languages that already thrives? Diversity fuels creativity, resilience, and empathy, qualities a single language cannot fully capture. What would you do if every word you ever heard sounded the same? Leave your own what if in the comments, and stay tuned for the next chapter where we explore the cultural convergence this reality would force. Imagine a world where every human voice echoes the same phrase. Picture this: 54,000 distinct tongues melt into a single, seamless chorus. The United Nations catalogs over 7,000 languages today. Today we erase them all in an instant. A single language, like a universal key, would unlock doors we never knew were locked. But what would that key open, and what might it break? Let's step into the consequences. Cultural convergence would reshape identity faster than any migration ever did. UNESCO reports that language loss accelerates cultural erosion by up to 30% in vulnerable communities. Imagine museums where the same story is narrated in identical tones, where festivals lose their unique chants. Visual cue: global art styles converge chart. So what happens when the subtle flavors of tradition become a bland broth? But what about the chance to share myths without translation loss, to weave a common narrative that binds strangers together? Economic and political ripples would surge as communication barriers vanish. The World Bank notes that trade friction falls by 15% when language differences are removed. Picture a summit where every delegate speaks fluently, where treaties are drafted in seconds, not months. Visual cue: trade flow map brightens. So, what does a frictionless market mean for power balances? Does it level the playing field or concentrate influence in the hands of those who still control resources? But what about the loss of diplomatic nuance that languages provide, the subtle art of negotiation that can prevent conflict? Technological and scientific acceleration would ignite like a supercharged engine. A 2021 Nature paper finds that multilingual collaboration delays breakthroughs by an average of 2.4 years. Imagine classrooms where every textbook sings the same syllabus, where research papers are instantly understood worldwide. Visual cue: global patent search graph. So what does this rapid innovation mean for humanity? Does it propel us toward solutions faster, or does it blind us to alternative paths? But what about the creative tension that diverse perspectives inject into problem solving? Contrast this with a world where language diversity thrives. Vibrant dialects spark innovation, preserve heritage, and foster empathy across borders. The lesson rings clear: unity without diversity risks a monochrome future, while diversity fuels resilience. Leave your own what if in the comments, and remember, a single language can unite the globe, but it's the chorus of many that gives it a soul. What if every human on Earth suddenly spoke the exact same language? Imagine the chatter of billions humming in perfect harmony. Picture this: today, over 7,000 languages color our planet, each a thread in a vast cultural tapestry. Now, one thread replaces them all, and the world rewrites its story. 1. Cultural convergence. Imagine waking up to a global chorus that sings the same words. UNESCO reports that language loss erases up to 5% of a community's cultural knowledge each generation. If every tongue vanished, that loss would accelerate to an unprecedented pace. Visual. World map of language families fades into a single script. Artists would lose the nuance of regional idioms, but a shared lexicon could spark new, hybrid art forms that blend traditions instantly. So what? Would the price of universal understanding be the silence of countless unique voices? But what about the economies that thrive on translation? 2. Economic and political ripple. Picture this. Diplomats no longer need interpreters, and trade agreements are signed in seconds. The World Bank notes that language barriers add is almost equal to 15% to transaction costs in cross-border commerce. With all parties speaking one language, those hidden costs collapse and supply chains accelerate. Visual. Trade flowchart simplifies into a single arrow. Nations that once leveraged multilingual advantage would lose a strategic edge, reshaping global power balances. So what? Does a frictionless market create a fairer world, or does it concentrate wealth in the hands of those already dominant? But what about the speed of discovery? 3. Technological and scientific acceleration. Imagine every researcher publishing in the same language, eliminating the translation lag that delays breakthroughs. A Nature-published study found that multilingual collaboration boosts citation impact by 22%. With one language, that boost becomes universal, and knowledge spreads at the speed of light. Visual. Global Research Network diagram glows. Open-source projects would scale instantly, and education could be delivered uniformly, raising global literacy overnight. So what? Is the race to innovate worth the risk of homogenizing thought, potentially stifling unconventional ideas that arise from diverse linguistic perspectives? Language unity can rewrite the rules of progress, but the cost is the silence of countless voices. Imagine a world where the chorus of 7,000 languages still sings, each dialect a thread in humanity's tapestry. Picture this. A bustling market in Marrakesh where vendors bargain in Arabic, then switch to Tamazight, while tourists respond in French, all weaving a complex rhythm of sound. UNESCO reports that a language vanishes every 2 weeks, a silent loss of cultural memory. UNESCO, 2022. Now flip the script. What if, instead, every child grew up hearing the same words, the same idioms, the same jokes? The visual cue. World map of language families, colors merged into one hue. In this counter-scenario, the richness of local folklore would flatten, like a watercolor left in the rain. Artists would lose the unique metaphors that spark innovation, and festivals would echo the same anthem, erasing the subtle differences that give each community its soul. So what? Does the convenience of universal comprehension outweigh the extinction of countless narratives that have shaped societies for millennia? But what about resilience? Diversity in language acts like genetic variation in a species, providing adaptive strength. A study by the World Bank found that multilingual regions exhibit higher economic stability during shocks because they can draw on varied knowledge pools. World Bank, 2021. If every voice sounded the same, that safety net would thin, leaving the global village vulnerable to a single point of failure. Consider education. In a single-language world, textbooks could be standardized, learning curves would steepen, and knowledge would spread faster, yet the very act of translation forces learners to think critically, to reframe concepts in new linguistic containers. That mental gymnastics fuels creativity. The loss of translation is not just a loss of words, but a loss of the cognitive gymnastics that spark breakthroughs. So, what does this tell us? The power of a shared tongue is undeniable, but the silence of countless voices is a price too steep for a truly vibrant future. Leave your own what if in the comments. How would you balance unity and diversity? What would you do when the world's languages whisper or roar? Subscribe for more impossible futures. Imagine a world where every tongue sings the same song. Picture this. Classrooms in Nairobi, Osaka, and Sao Paulo all reciting the same textbook, the same cadence. UNESCO's 2022 report warns that language loss erodes cultural memory, a truth that would vanish if diversity were silenced. So what? But what about the richness that thrives in contrast? Think of a bustling market where a vendor's call in Swahili meets a poet's verses in Quechua, each phrase a thread in humanity's tapestry. The loss of those threads would simplify global dialogue, yet it would also strip away the nuanced humor, the metaphors that only a specific culture can craft. A visual cue. Mosaic of world flags fading to one color. Now consider the flip side, a kaleidoscope of languages coexisting, each preserving unique worldviews. Studies from the Max Planck Institute show that bilingual brains process problems 15% faster, a cognitive boost born from juggling multiple linguistic systems. So, what if we preserved that mental elasticity on a planetary scale? But what about the economic engine? A single language might accelerate trade by eliminating translation costs. World Bank data estimates $30 billion saved annually. Yet competition would intensify, and the very market niches that thrive on cultural specificity, handcrafted textiles, regional cuisine, traditional music, could wither. Visual cue, bar chart of trade savings versus cultural sector decline. And the political arena? Diplomacy would become a razor-thin game of policy, not persuasion. The art of negotiation, honed through careful phrasing and cultural nuance, would lose its depth. As former UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres notes, language is the soul of identity, reminding us that even the most efficient dialogue can't replace empathy rooted in shared heritage. So, what does that mean for global peace? In the end, the paradox is clear. Unity through a single language offers speed, but diversity offers resilience. The lesson? Progress thrives when we amplify connections without erasing the distinct voices that fuel creativity and problem-solving. Leave your own what if in the comments. How would you balance unity and diversity? What would you do when the world's languages whisper or roar? Subscribe for more impossible